let's get into summertime. So, as I alluded to earlier, summertime is a great time in the art world because many people, other than Art Basel in June, everyone takes a big break. I feel like during the summer, galleries have summer hours, and many years ago, I realized it was pointless, frankly, to create content during this time. Also, for my mental health, I really needed to take a break from creating content for a couple of months. Not that I ever really take a break, but a break for me where I didn't feel pressure or anything to kind of put out videos and stuff. And frankly, it was just a huge pain because galleries are closed on the weekends. That's when I normally go, on a Saturday, and I'll shoot stuff. So I wasn't able to go during the week because of my regular job. And so, yeah, it has just always been a challenge for me. So it's something that I stopped trying to fight a couple of years ago and I started to embrace. And for this summer, as I mentioned, like I wanted to do things a little differently this last year. And I did things very differently in the summer, some things for better, some things for worse. I rented a place in Vermont, in Manchester, Vermont, which is a really beautiful town in Vermont, and spent the weekends there, a lot of weekends in the summer, which was its own adventure and my own kind of personal adventure, leaving the city and going somewhere different on weekends, which was fun. It also gave me kind of a home base to explore. I had a car for the first time in about 10 years. I've lived in New York for over 10 years now, and not consecutively, but as a whole, I haven't had a car since I was in college. And so basically, I was excited to have a car to visit a lot of places around Vermont and institutions in upstate New York and whatnot. So I had a huge list of places that I wanted to see and experience. And some of these places were brand new, like the campus, for example, that had just opened. And I have videos for all of those. I know I said I would take a break from content, but I did, obviously want to capture them in some way. So I will try to share those below. But the ones that were really magical for me and that I wanted to call out were Jack Shaman's school. I was so impressed by the space. I know that it's been open for like over 10 years. I think they bought the place in like 2013. They did such an incredible job of transforming the building, first of all. Kinderhook, it's located in Kinderhook, New York, is such an incredible place in general. It's very charming. It's very beautiful. Loved visiting the town. It's always nice when it's like a cute town to go to because then you can, eat and enjoy and go to the little bookstore and, kind of make a day out of it. And that was really fun. But the school is phenomenal. First of all, it's beautiful property. It's this old school. There's sculptures outside by like Hank Willis Thomas and other artists. And then you go inside, and the show that I saw was by Nina Chanel Abney, who I really enjoy her works. And first of all, the number of works, the place is huge. Like it's so massive. And I know that that's why they probably wanted to have the space, was because it can house just very different institutional level exhibits that they couldn't have in their gallery spaces in New York, just from a size constraint perspective. So that was before their Tribeca space opened, I should say, but like truly opened. It like soft opened earlier in January, and then that's a longer story. But anyway, basically, it was this incredible space. The show was incredible. I love how they utilized every single piece of the school, whether it be the gymnasium or the various classrooms. I love how they worked with the challenges of a building like that. For example, all the windows, they had really beautiful kind of soft light shades and lighting to really transform the space into the benefits of having like a white cube space where you can see the artworks and you're not having, sunlight messing with the lighting in various ways. But then you also still recognize that it's a school, of course, and you have all the characteristics of the school, which was great that they left. I was really impressed by that. I mean, in general, Jack Shaman Gallery is such an impressive gallery space, but then to see this particular space, that was so wonderful. I also want to call out the Hall Art Foundation. It was in Vermont, and a little bit of a journey. Even being in Vermont, traveling to a different part of Vermont, it was about an hour and a half away from Manchester, and It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, to be honest, but because of that, it's so beautiful. And I loved all of the outdoor sculptures, but I also loved the different sculptures. So there was like a Sherry Levine show, there was a Barbara Kruger show, there was an Ed Ruscha show. So they had a really beautiful, just different way of highlighting various artists from the Hall Art Foundation's collection, which is quite extensive. So loved that. I loved, we were lucky it was summertime and it was beautiful weather. And so being outside, I will say that. The campus, that was an experience. Dia, I've got to talk about Dia just for the sake of time. I had never been to Dia Beacon, which is kind of embarrassing, until this summer. And like the space, it's huge, first of all. It's so massive. The amount of incredible art, the quality of incredible art in there. I mean, it's got a very particular point of view, a lot of minimalism, a lot, Donald Judd and art that, Warhol, and very specific art from specific times where even if you're not a big fan of those artists, it's still really fun to see and to go and to experience the place. And for me, I think the most spiritual part of it, for lack of a better term, was the Richard Serra works, especially because he passed away this year. Being able to see and experience walking through the curves and those sculptures, like there's nothing like it. I don't know how else to describe it. It was truly a spiritual experience. I also remember watching a video in art class in high school about Richard Serra and about these works. I think probably actually right when they came to Dia, that would have been about the time. And so then to, be there 10, 15, 20 years later, I don't want to age myself here, but it was like, yeah, it was really, really magical. And you really understood the power of his works in a way that just is hard to from a photo or even from a video, but just that physicality and the curves of the space like really had an impact on you and has an impact on you. So that was such a pleasure to see his work. So I do want to call that out. And then August, I did nothing, which was great. I took a break and it was very necessary because with the Armory show coming up in September and all of that, I needed a little bit of a rest, and it was nice. It was nice to have that. So again, I have to touch on the Armory show. We are in September, and I loved the Armory show this year. I will say, here's some advice. So I went for the opening, the VIP opening, and it was on a Thursday. I left work early. I was like stressed. I was not in a good headspace. And I got really overwhelmed and really frustrated. And it was nothing for the fair. It was, same fair. And then I went back on Saturday and I spent the whole day and I was really able to enjoy it. And it was like a completely different experience. So I will say for a fair like Armory that's so big, if you're able to financially, see it twice. Just because, and I would say the same thing about Art Basel or Paris Art Basel, for example. I went twice. You miss things. I mean, you always miss things because these fairs are so massive, but like it also gives you a little time to like take it all in, to relax. I don't know. I just find that second time, I really, really, really enjoyed it. And again, I discovered there were a lot of great solo booths by more emerging artists like Tomo Campbell and Kate Gottians. I hope I'm saying that right. Alex Barth as well at MRS Gallery or Mrs. Gallery. I'm not sure how you're supposed to say it, but some really, really great solo booths. I highlight them all in my Armory show video, but I did just want to call out that I thought the Armory show this year was 10 out of 10. There were also some really great shows adjacent to Armory show in Chelsea at that time. The Josh Klein show at Lisson Gallery, I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I can't get that show out of my head still. And I've liked Josh Klein's work. I've never been like over the moon fangirling about them, but this show, I think because it felt very personal, frankly, as someone who works from home, works on the computer all the time. I mean, I do go into the office sometimes, but as someone who's predominantly at home, who even my hobby is over the computer. And so the mouse and the carpal tunnel and the Gene office chair and kind of commenting on how work is now and who are we as creators and how we're sort of having to be brand ambassadors and have our own agencies and do it all from being the public brand to also like everything behind the scenes and then what that means for us. There were so many things about this show. I mean, I could do a whole video just about this show, but I really, really, really personally connected with this show as a millennial working from home, but also as a creator. Oh, this show just like spoke to me on so many levels. So that was phenomenal. The Liza Lau show, or Liza Liu show at Lehman Maupin Gallery. I love her work. I've been such a fan of her work for so long, pretty much ever since I started researching and getting deeper into the art world. I love her work and I love this evolution of her work. It's always so fun and cool to see an artist when they can evolve their work, but not in a way that like loses their audience. And I think she did such a great thing I mean, I'm biased because you guys know I love abstract art. So this was right up my alley, but the way that she combined, her use of beads and color and then creating these abstract artworks with it, I loved that combination and I loved that departure and that freedom for her. And it really resonated for me in her works. So I absolutely love that. And then the Peter Schoolworth show at Petzl Gallery was unreal. So Petzl moved into this new space in Chelsea, I think the year before, maybe even earlier than that. But when they moved off of their 18th Street, maybe 19th Street location, can't even remember now, to this 25th Street location, at first I was like, okay, like it's bigger, whatever. But the shows that they've had there and how they've utilized the space, I applaud them because they've done, I mean, that Derek Forgeor show in November of 2023 was unreal. I mean, the way that they transformed the space, use the different gallery spaces to have, the theater and then the workshop and then the more traditional kind of white cube space. It was unreal. It was so unreal. I went back to that show, I'm not joking, like 4 times. I went so many times because it was so amazing. And I rarely ever, ever, ever do that. The most I'll go back is usually twice, but I mean, I loved that show. This Peter Schoolworth show, they did a similar thing where they really utilized the spaces. They took you on a journey as a viewer where they kind of led you through each of the experiences and you saw how it all fit together over time, whether that be through the virtual reality aspect in the film or going into seeing the miniatures to then going into the actual sort of recreation of the bathroom and stuff that was in the film and then all of the works surrounding it. I loved the show. And again, it's sometimes when galleries like transform their spaces to be more all-encompassing or entrenching or whatever, it could be a little gimmicky, but this was so additive to the show and really like spoke to the works on so many levels. And the reason I say that it's applaudable to Petzl for doing shows like this with their artists is because it is it's such an investment, right? Like it really shows that they care about their artist because it's not like they're making more money off of this. It's purely for the benefit and the storytelling of their artists. And so I just love what they're doing and I hope to see more of that when it makes sense, of course. And I just wanted to call that show out. And then what else do we have here? Oh, of course. Oh my gosh. Another amazing show at Gallery Lilong. This was a show by Leonardo Drew. A lot of similar themes here. So in this show, he also introduced a new evolution of his work, but again, in a way that was very true to his signature style of assemblage, where he's using these sort of discarded materials and then assembling them in a way, again, that's so meticulously done that it elevates it into this like spiritual place. And so the back room was more similar to shows and works that he's had in the past and that you can see in many major museums like Crystal Bridges and whatnot. But the front showed the newer works, which were more geometric and had this sort of grid system to them, and introduced a new material for him, which were mirrors. And I'm sure there's a lot of symbolism, as you can guess, that comes along with mirrors and wanting to include them. Visually, it was really stunning. I mean, just on a superficial level, but yeah, loved the geometricness of these works and that evolution for him. So that was a really amazing show. And then we get to October, which October is one of my busiest months, and this October was no exception. I went from London to Paris to Venice, and so I spent about 2 weeks in Europe, which is UK and Europe. Such a blessing, I will say. Such a wonderful experience. Super exhausting, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, you guys probably saw it took me months afterwards to sift through and put together all of the content. Again, that's also why I kind of want to do more videos like this, is because it allows me to sit down and share my thoughts in a little bit of a faster way, so I can also ideally get things to you all in more closer to real time, so it's not months after, a month after the Biennale is closed that I'm telling you my thoughts about it. But anyway, my trip was set up in a way where I had about 5 days in Venice, a week in Paris, and then just a weekend in London. In fact, we weren't even originally supposed to do London, but again, I wanted to see some of these shows. I wanted to spend a tiny bit of time there as much as possible, and I love taking the train to Paris so much more than flying to Paris. So as much as I can take Eurostar from London to Paris, I will always choose that route. In fact, any day I would rather take a train over flying. It's just such a better experience. But in London, I wasn't expecting the shows to be as good as they were this year. Otherwise, I would have planned for like another day to be there. In fact, I only had 1 day to see shows. We flew in on a Friday flight. I had Saturday to see all of the exhibits on my list, and then Sunday we were leaving Sunday we had a day to do some stuff in London, but all the galleries were closed, and then Monday we were heading to Paris. And so I had 1 day. I didn't even get to go to Frieze London. It was so busy for me the year prior that I wasn't super motivated to go. And so anyway, the shows were phenomenal, and I was kind of bummed that my schedule was set up in that way, but you just never know, to be honest. And they don't release the press releases and stuff until like a month beforehand. My flights are usually booked before then. But anyway, so it was a whole thing. I was lucky to see as much as I could within 1 day. And the shows that I want to call out from that day are the Marco Pariani show at Scarsdale Gallery. I love everything about this show. I love his work. I've been following it for a while, but I loved the take on baking and like the gingerbread men and the stamps, and including some of those more interesting icons amongst his very traditional, looser abstractness. And yeah, I thought it was like a fun play on it. Also helped that it was, October, it was kind of holiday season. So I love to see that. That was a great show. The Oscar Murillo show, similar to, Cecily Brown, Adrian Guiani, Mary Weatherford. If there's an Oscar Murillo show, I am there. His show in Venice, I can't remember if it was the year before. I think it was the year before that, actually, yeah. The 2022 Venice Biennale. My God, what is time? That show was incredible. And so this show was, no exception at David Zwirner. Really wonderful show. The George Rui show at Hauser and Wirth. This was his inaugural show, and it was part 1. Part two is going to be in LA for Freeze LA, which I'm so bummed. I don't think I'm going to be able to see it. If you go back, I've been a fan of George Rui for a very, very, very long time. Every time I would take photos of a Perez Projects booth at any fair, I would stand next to the Donna Huanca and I would stand next to the George Rui. I just adore his work and I'm so happy for him with Hauser taking him on because he's truly, I think, one of the most talented painters of my generation and of the younger generation of contemporary artists. This show, this is another one I would have seen 5 times if I lived in London and if I was able to see it. And it's just phenomenal. So if you're in LA, check that out. But I think hands down, this is one of the best shows of the year for sure. Andre Butzer's show at Max Hetzer, I enjoyed. I enjoyed it because, so I don't know when they opened this space actually, but there was like a whole other gallery space. There's like a second gallery space now in the back. So you had the two kind of the front room and then middle room and then the end room. And then there was this whole other part. And I loved that it was a mix of a few different series of his. It was like a little like baby survey where you can kind of look at his, like if you didn't know anything about Andre Butzer, this would be a fun show to bring a friend to kind of walk through like, these are the works that he's famous for and these are his series. And like, here are some examples from each series. And that was the show for me at Max Hetzler. And then Sadie Coles. I love going to Sadie Coles because unlike other galleries, actually, she might be in, you can call me out if I'm wrong. I think she's just based in London, like Pilar Carias, but I loved this Urs Fischer show and I love going here because it is such a unique space and it's only in London. And I loved how he transformed the space to look like his studio with the paint drops on the floor. I also love that they incorporated the furniture throughout so that you could sit. I know it sounds silly and underrated and it's in a lot of museums, but the fact that they added this to the gallery space, I really appreciate because especially for what I do, where I'm going to like so many shows over and over and over again, it's really nice to just like sit down sometimes and take a weight off and enjoy the show and relax. And yeah, I think sometimes it can feel awkward, like standing in front of an artwork for a really long time. And when there's a seat, you can just like sit there and be meditative and it's really nice. So I loved that they included little pieces of furniture in the same kind of theme of the show in each room, which was great. So then we get to Paris, which, as I mentioned, I was in Paris for a week and I was, so there's a couple of reasons for this. I was a little disappointed overall in the Paris shows, but I think the reason for it is that the Centre Pompidou was having a huge exhibit celebrating the 100 years of Surrealism. So all of these galleries like Peloton and everyone were having shows about Surrealism or like adjacent to Surrealism. And I discovered that I don't like Surrealism. And I mean, I respect Surrealism from an art history standpoint. Obviously, you know, Dali and Magritte, I will always have a soft spot in my heart for them from an art history perspective. But in terms of, I don't feel compelled to dig up other artists who were creating surrealist works from that time because I just don't, I'm like, I can feel nostalgic, but I don't love the movement. It doesn't emotionally resonate with me that much. And so because so many shows, I think, were trying to pay tribute and, you know, align with surrealism as a whole, I wasn't that enthused with quite a few of them. So I actually left out quite a few shows, which I don't normally do. And I will also call out, thanks to, and I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but Nada had their first art fair in Paris in partnership with the community. I thought that was really fantastic. I know it was a little chaotic. I heard there was kind of like a last minute location change and stuff, but it's through fairs like Nada and organizations like Nada that you can discover a lot of emerging galleries. In fact, I think I need to do a whole video on how to find, you know, good quality galleries and emerging artists in your area or in, you know, major cities like this. So because there is a little bit of an art to it, and my biggest tip on that is to use things like NADA, institutions like NADA, to organizations like NADA, to go through their list, because they have a quality bar and they have, you know, an evaluation process that can do kind of the work for you, if that makes any sense. Anyway, that's a long way of saying that I discovered so many incredible Paris galleries that I wish I could have visited, and that I wish I could have included their shows, but I just didn't know they existed until the very end. I didn't end up going to NADA until a couple of days before I was leaving Paris. And so, unfortunately, until next time, Paris, my apologies. I kind of feature a lot of just the major, kind of more US based galleries. But yeah, a lot of amazing, amazing emerging artists that I discovered out of the salon, and I really, really enjoyed it. A lot of New York artists. That's the funny thing, is like, even though I live in New York, I discovered a lot of New York galleries that I wanted to go see their spaces that I just hadn't heard of yet. There are hundreds of galleries in New York, and that is not an exaggeration. So it's basically impossible to keep up with all of them. And so the fair left me really excited to visit more of those like emerging galleries back in my home city. I obviously have to call out Art Basel Paris, which was phenomenal. It was, you could just like feel the energy and how amazing it was to be back in the Grand Palais again. I mean, there's nothing like it. It's just the most incredible architecture, and the way the light moves through the space and all of the booths. Like, the energy was just so incredible. Oh, so many great works as well. Like I said, I'm so lucky to be able to have 2 days. I mean, a personal highlight for me was being painted by Sophie von Hellerman. Pilar Carayas brought her to do live paintings of people's dreams, and she's an artist that I love and that I collect. And so to be able to have a portrait of myself done by her was just, couldn't have imagined anything cooler, anything better. I was not expecting it. I had no idea. They kind of told us right beforehand. So anyway, Art Basel Paris was phenomenal. That was my personal highlight. Some other personal highlights for me: the Harold Ankar show at Gagosian. I loved the giant piece upstairs that was like 22 feet long, of the mountains. Again, it's his typical style. It's his signature style, but I still love a show in the same way that I love a Nicholas Party show. You know what you're going to get, but you still love and admire his works. And so I really loved that. And then Sylvia Snowden was a new artist to me that was at White Cube Gallery. I had actually never been to their space in Paris before, so being able to see the White Cube space and how beautiful and Parisian it is. It's right next to Scarsted and Marian Ibrahim and all these other amazing galleries. So I'm glad I finally got to go there for once. And then the Rashid Johnson show. I thought that it was curated so well and so cleanly. I mean, that's what you get with a gallery like Hauser and Gagosian. They're just to the point, thoughtful, easy to understand. And I will say I enjoyed the show in person so much more. I really loved the video of the show, actually, the video art in the show. And I'm not really one for video art, but I loved that in particular. And I personally really loved his sculptures. I thought that was like a perfect adaptation of his signature fluidness and use of line to create, his characteristic skulls, but then to put that in a sculpture, in a bronze sculpture, was like really, really cool evolution of his work. And then shout out to Austin Uzor at Matt Gallery. This was a gallery that I'd never been to before, but they had work of his at Chicago Expo that I saw in April, and I just absolutely fell in love and got super excited by his work. So I was very excited to see this show of his. These are smaller works than he normally does. I would say he normally has larger works, and he did have one large work in the back, but all of these smaller works, I really, really loved this show, and I'm so interested and excited to like follow his career and see where he goes as an artist. The Chris O'Feely show at David Swerner Gallery was also phenomenal. Again, it's hard to like surprise me. I've seen so many things. I'm not trying to brag when I say that. I just mean like I see a lot, as you all know, from my shows that I cover. And this, I never seen anything like it. I thought it was whimsical and I thought it was such an incredible experience. And I enjoyed it as a viewer, being able to, there's something so hard nowadays about when you see an art exhibit, there's nothing that feels particularly ephemeral about it. And I know this is so hypocritic coming from me because I film these shows, I take photos of these shows, and I want them to live on forever, which is, you know, what I'm motivated to do. Which is great. But at the same time, when you're seeing a work, sometimes it's hard to feel that urgency of like, I'm viewing this in person and I'm never going to get to see this again in this way, and this like surprise and delight kind of aspect. I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but by covering the work with this cloth and having to like peek in every single time that you wanted to see it, there was something that was really playing up this concept of scarcity and supply and demand, which is, you know, what runs the whole art world. But in a really beautiful, whimsical way where you were like excited to see every time like what was going to be there. Like it was like a little treat. It was a little surprise. And I loved that aspect of it. I loved the charcoal frames and the beautiful coloring and the use of black in the works. And yeah, I just thought it was a really great show. I wish I would have been able to see the corresponding show at Victoria Miro. I don't know why. Like, surely other people were coming from Paris for Art Basel Paris to Venice to see the Biennale. I know other people were, like myself, afterwards. I don't know why Victoria Miro wouldn't have opened the show a little bit closer to Art Basel Paris so that, you know, people could have seen it, but it's fine. That's okay. I'll let it go. And then always good to go to Almian Resch Gallery. That space is like one of my favorites in Paris. And the Genesis Tremaine show was lovely. I love her take and her reinterpretation of what the saints are to her, and to really take something and reclaim it and own it, which is this figure. And yeah, really, I really enjoyed that show. I love the pink walls as well in the final gallery. I thought that was a nice touch. Okay, guys, we're almost there. We are almost there, I promise. So Venice, seeing any Venice Biennale is such a gift to see. And I realized I didn't share a lot of my thoughts about it going into it, but because that, again, could be a whole nother video in itself that I wish I could have done, but I'll just try to keep it short. I think I came into it having no expectations. I really had zero expectations around the theme and any type of like personal connection that I was going to have to it. And maybe that comes from a place of I'm an American and I don't feel, as Americans, we are a melting pot in general. And I think this is just my perspective, but compared to a lot of Europeans, for example, or people that live elsewhere, we tend to resonate less with our culture because our culture is so fragmented. Versus, you know, in Europe, you're like, I'm German, or I'm from the UK, or I'm Spanish, or I just feel like your ancestry and your roots mean a lot more versus us. Because our history is usually quite so fragmented, it just doesn't mean as much. Or maybe it doesn't mean as much to me. Sorry, ancestors. But I just think of myself as, in the same way that I don't think of myself as like, I am a woman on a regular, like, it's just something that's not top of mind for me. It's just something that I just think of myself as a soul and an individual. And I'm not on a, I mean, I am reminded, unfortunately, you know, when things like Roe v. Wade and whatnot get repealed, the horribleness of my gender, but, and what it means to be a woman in America. But on a regular daily basis, I am privileged enough where I'm just not like thinking about a lot of this stuff regularly. And so I wasn't coming into this Biennale with the idea of foreigners everywhere, like personally resonated and of like, yeah, I'm a foreigner and like this will mean something to me in a really deeply personal way. So I think that actually was to my benefit because I was able to look at it more objectively. And I just think they did an incredible job personally because some overall themes for me, again, not to get too deep into it, but the whole idea of foreigners everywhere is that like what even does it mean to be a foreigner? Like we are all so fragmented at this point. And I kind of love, I mean, I'm biased because I'm American, but I love that they kind of pointed out that especially in Europe and especially when in areas like Turkey and now Ukraine, like culture has become so fragmented, whether that be due to economics or war or just so many different factors or just time. I mean, even look at somewhere like the UK, like what does it really mean to be British? And if you're an artist that is from another country that's lived in the UK your whole life, but maybe your ancestors weren't British, what does that mean? And I just love that they had all this dialogue around that and around, this concept of foreignness and what that really means. And that is what spoke to me. And I appreciated that. Obviously, everyone is entitled to like their own opinion about things. But anyway, I just had to touch on the Venice Biennale, obviously, because I was very lucky to go there. Two other things that I wanted to call out other than getting to see Ventrup, his Venice space was just like so incredible and that was really wonderful. But the Genevieve Figgis show at Palazzo Cavaness, which is Almian Resch's Venice outpost. I love Genevieve Figgis. Again, to go Mary Weatherford, Cecily Brown, everyone else I mentioned. Like when there's a Genevieve Figgis show, I am there. I love her works. And to see these works inspired by Venice and this kind of old world aristocracy and imaginatively in Venice and whatnot, I just loved. And I loved that seeing her signature style, but then applying it to these beautiful palazzos and the gondolas and these like really traditional symbols of Venice. I loved that. It was such a special show. And then to see it in Venice, obviously, was even more phenomenal. So I really, really enjoyed that. And then also the show at Palazzo Diedo, I believe is how you say, from the Berggruen Foundation. I always butcher his name. Sorry, Nicholas. But this show was amazing. I was so surprised, like I said in my video, about how under construction it still was. But the things that stood out to me, other than seeing some of my favorite artists like Urs Fischer and Sterling Ruby, I mean, those Sterling Ruby works, the giant textile works in the hallway were just the most incredible way to sort of open up the space and to begin the exhibit. The glass teardrops and raindrops from Urs, like my reflection, and then looking out at the reflection of the palazzo as well as Venice beyond, like that was so magical. Such an incredible work. But then the frescoes were really what got me. Like frescoes from these contemporary artists like Urs, like Lee Ufan, I think is how you say it, taking something that is traditionally Italian, usually associated, of course, with Renaissance, Baroque, very, dynamic, color-rich, texture-rich works, and then taking more minimalist, almost quasi-pop artists like Urs, and then putting them into this fresco, I thought was just so cool. And, such an interesting way to tie together the old world and the new world. So that was such a very cool highlight for me personally for Venice. And I'm really excited to see what they continue to do with this space. Okay, guys, we're almost to the final stretch. So similar to the months after February and October, I obviously had a lot of content from October that I was still sifting through. So I didn't go to as many shows in November, but there were some that I do want to talk about. The Cecily Brown show I have to talk about at Paula Cooper Gallery. I can't even actually remember the last time I went to Paula Cooper Gallery. I don't know. She just hasn't had a show in a long time that I'd wanted to look at and to see. But this show, I mean, from the very entryway with like the smaller works to then the larger works in the greater room. I actually really loved the very front room where it was her drawings. I think it was like drawing and maybe watercolor, gouache or something on top. But the drawings and seeing that they were just as fabulous, almost like a studies for the larger works. And so, yeah, that show was really beautiful and lovely, coming off of the heels of her show that was at the Met, which was great. And so, yeah, always a joy to be able to see her works in person. They were as wonderful as ever. Another great show of abstract paintings was at Pace Gallery. They're kind of like old standalone 25th Street location, not the bigger one with all the levels, but Pam Evelyn, I loved these works. I loved, yeah, the multiple panels, the colors, the size. I could have used some more of them. There weren't that many in the show, but obviously I get it because like the scale of them and whatnot. But yeah, that was a nice show. And then there were two shows that I want to call out that were in Tribeca, Soho area. So one of them was Trenton Doyle Hancock's show at James Cohen Gallery. This was a really special show, and I'm glad I actually got to see it. I was worried that I was not going to make it before it closed, but this was a show of his works, and it was in parallel with his show that's still on view at the Jewish Museum, where he's talking about sort of the parallels of his work and Philip Guston and how they're interrelated and interconnected and whatnot. And yeah, so it was great to see that show. And then the other show that I really enjoyed, and I'd love to see another iteration of it selfishly, was the Cause collection at the Drawing Center. I feel like everyone in the art world knows that Cause is a huge art collector. I personally know he's a massive collector of Peter Saul, for example. If you're in any museum anywhere and you see multiple Peter Saul works, most of them will probably say that it's from Brian Donnelly or from Cause. So yeah, he's just known for having a really extensive collection. I would die to see his whole collection and really understand like the depths of it maybe one day. But yeah, I love that he's such an avid, most artists are, to be honest. Most artists do collect a lot of art, but he is like really collects a lot in a really thoughtful way. And so I loved that this show, of course it was at the Drawing Center, so it really focused more on works on paper and drawing and whatnot. That's why I say I would love to see an iteration of the show, because I would love to see, I'm a sucker for a painting, as you guys have probably figured out by now. So I would love to see a show that highlights an even large, like I think he'd be such a great, I think 20 years from now, the Louis Vuitton collection, heard it here first, should do, you know, a survey of his collection of all of his paintings and whatnot. I think they're such a great institution to pull together everything like that, because they have the power to grab all of his stuff from all these other museums and like bring it together. But yeah, I would love to see just an even bigger one, because while this was like an impressive show and had such an extensive amount of works from like emerging artists, but also artists that we all would recognize, like Dana Schutz and Raymond Pettibone, Ed Ruscha. It also, and there was a ton of stuff in it. But again, I know that his collection is like even more expansive and impressive than that. So I just think it'd be cool to see an even greater scale, and then give him more space, give the man more space to show what he's really got going on. So anyway, I'll let that go there. And I want to end this video and I want to talk about December. Similar to August, I took a little bit of a break because I was just trying to get through all the October content, and I had a lot of personal stuff in November that I was kind of taking my attention away from this a little bit. And yeah, but I wanted to call out, I was able to visit the original and real Casa Wabi in Puerto Escondido from Bosco Sodi. It is designed by Tado Andau, which is like so incredible to be able to see this place in person. And they had an exhibit by Jose Davalia, I think is how you say his name. And the exhibit was all inspired by the actual building and everything around it. I won't talk as much about Casa Wabi because, again, I could do a whole video about it, and maybe I will later this year because I am going back this year. But I did just want to touch on that, like, it's such a magical, incredible place, and it was such a wonderful place to end the year and end on that note. in terms of art. And yeah, it really helped me also understand Bosco Sodi's work as well. You just get it more when you're there and you see the studio and you see his work hanging on the walls and the relationship between nature and this beautiful structure. And that's a lot of what his work is about, is like nature and the relationship between what we create and letting time and destiny sort of take over these things. So anyway, that was really magical. So ended the year on a really, really beautiful note. And I hope this video isn't a bajillion years long, but I hope you enjoy this new format. I really enjoyed it, actually, just kind of stream of conscious. I think ironically at the end of it now, my voice has finally warmed up. I usually film my videos at like 6 in the morning before work, so I'm quite raspy, and I feel like now I feel like my voice has come into its own, of course, at the very end of filming. So yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this new format. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that you had a fun time walking through 2024 with me. And I think 2025 is going to be a great year, and I'm excited to share a lot more art with you all. And I'll see y'all in my next video.